My name is Jack Miller, and I'm 42 years old, though some days I feel 100. For 15 of those years, I wore the gray uniform of a corrections officer, a job that grinds you down until the man you were is just a faint memory. I lived my entire professional life by the line, the one between order and chaos, between us and them, a barrier I believed was forged from steel and reinforced concrete. I built my career on that line, respected it, and enforced it with an unwavering resolve that I mistook for strength. It turns out, that line isn't made of anything so solid. It's woven from secrets, lies, and the quiet compromises good men make when they're backed into a corner. To be absolutely clear, the names of the people and the facility in this story have been altered, not to protect the guilty, but to protect what's left of my own life. This isn't intended as an exposé on the entire correction system, because there are still good officers walking the tiers every single day. But this is my personal account, my testimony of what can happen when that system doesn't just bend, but shatters completely, when the very men charged with upholding the rules are the ones profiting from breaking them. The secret I'm about to tell you is the reason I'll never wear a uniform again, the reason I still check the locks on my doors 3 times before I go to bed. It's a story that started with whispers, a subtle poison seeping through the porous walls of the prison, a contagion of fear that grew until it had a life of its own. And it all ended in a moment of pure, deafening silence, the moment I stared directly into the face of a man who wielded total power and saw nothing reflected back but hollow, abject fear. For 3 solid, excruciating weeks, they were testing me, and it was unlike anything I had ever experienced. This wasn't the usual inmate games, the petty defiance of refusing a direct order, the sudden, explosive flare-ups in the yard that you learn to handle before they even start. I was an expert at de-escalating that kind of chaos. It was loud, predictable, and honest in its own violent way. This was different. This was silent, methodical, and chillingly intelligent. It felt less like a challenge and more like a dissection. It began with seemingly insignificant things, events so small you could almost convince yourself they were accidents. The first was a sharpened piece of metal, a 6-inch shard from a machine press, left perfectly centered in the middle of my patrol path in the prison workshop. It was placed point up, almost like a welcome mat, just waiting for a careless step. Anyone else might have missed it, but 15 years teaches you to see the things that are out of place. Then came the psychological shift, the silent, coordinated stares from a dozen inmates as I walked the length of C-block. It was like a switch being flipped. As I entered the tier, all conversation would cease, and a wave of pure, unadulterated hate would just follow me like a physical shadow. Heads would turn in unison, eyes locking onto me, following my every step until I passed. The moment I was gone, the noise would resume as if nothing had happened. It's the kind of unnerving, collective behavior you desperately try to write off as paranoia, a symptom of job burnout, because acknowledging the alternative, that it's a coordinated, targeted campaign of intimidation, is just too terrifying to contemplate in a place where you are outnumbered 100 to 1. But then the whispers began, and paranoia was no longer a luxury I could afford. My name. Miller. It wasn't shouted or spoken, it was hissed from behind steel doors as I passed, a sibilant sound like a snake in the dark. It would come from a cell on my left, and by the time I turned my head, it would be echoed from a cell on my right. That's when I knew with absolute certainty that this wasn't random aggression. It was a calculated push, a meticulously planned chess game where I didn't know the rules, had no idea who my opponent was, and every piece on the board was hostile. They were making it undeniably clear that I was their target. They wanted a reaction, they wanted me to break, to snap, to lose the very control that was the foundation of my authority. And I was about to give them one, but it wouldn't be the one they expected. It would be a reaction they would never, ever forget. We'll call the place Blackwood Correctional Facility, a name that suits its grim, light-swallowing nature. It's not on any public map, deliberately erased from the world it's meant to protect, but I promise you, the concrete was real, the steel was cold, and the despair was suffocating. It's a high-security dumping ground for the worst of the worst, a concrete tomb tucked away in some forgotten valley where the cell signal dies a full mile out, severing its inhabitants from the outside world entirely. The very air inside has a taste, that sharp, metallic tang of industrial disinfectant failing to mask the underlying stench of stale sweat, unwashed bodies, and simmering, hopeless despair. For a decade, I had walked its tiers, learned its unique and deadly rhythms, the ebb and flow of tension that told you when violence was about to erupt. I was known for being firm but fair. I was not a bully who used his authority as a weapon, But I was certainly not a friend to the men I guarded. I was a professional, a dying breed in a job that either breaks you or corrupts you. My job was to maintain a fragile order among 500 violent men crammed into a deteriorating space originally built for 300. The overcrowding was a constant pressure cooker, amplifying every conflict, every grievance. In that world, built on a complex web of unwritten rules and brutal hierarchies, my reputation for being unbendable, for being a man of my word, was my only body armor. I gave respect when it was earned, and I demanded it back without exception. The architect of this whole unfolding nightmare, the man who decided to unravel my life thread by thread, was an inmate named Silas. He wasn't your typical shot caller, not one of the muscle-bound gang leaders who ruled through intimidation and brute force. He was quiet, physically unassuming, almost like a visiting professor who had taken a wrong turn. He was serving a life sentence for a series of complex computer crimes, a digital ghost who had stolen millions from encrypted accounts without ever touching a keyboard himself, using intricate social engineering to make others do his bidding. Inside Blackwood, his brilliant, strategic brain was his weapon. He commanded a fierce and absolute loyalty not through violence, but through strategy, by seeing the weaknesses in the system and in the men around him that nobody else did. And for some reason I couldn't fathom, he had decided to play me. It began with those subtle tests, as I said. A tool forgotten on the workshop floor. A small fire, accidentally, started in a trash can on my watch, forcing a lockdown. Then came the bogus verbal harassment, complaint filed against me by an inmate known for his lies, a complaint that took weeks of bureaucratic headaches and internal interviews to clear my name. They were just little tests of my attention, my patience, my resolve. I meticulously documented everything, every small incident that was out of the ordinary, every whisper, every coordinated stare. My logbook became my shield, a detailed record of the escalating campaign. I finally took my growing concerns, and my logbook, to the one man who could do something about it. Warden Robert Thompson. Warden Thompson was a man who looked like he was carved from granite, all sharp angles and hard lines. A career corrections man with a carefully cultivated public reputation for running the tightest ship in the state. His office was a shrine to order, spotless and meticulously organized, his uniform always perfectly pressed. He listened to me with a practiced patience, steepling his fingers and resting his chin on them, his cold eyes giving absolutely nothing away. He took my logbook and glanced at a few pages with an air of profound boredom, as if it were a piece of trash someone had handed him. "Officer Miller," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that was used to being obeyed without question. "You've been here a long time. You know how they are. They get bored. They push boundaries. It's what they do." He paused, tapping a finger on my logbook. "Silas is smart, sure. A genuine white-collar genius. But at the end of the day, he's just another convict in a cage. Don't let him get in your head. That's where they win. Handle your block." He slid the book back across the polished desk. It wasn't advice. It was a dismissal. In his world of black-and-white authority, my gut feeling, my 15 years of experience, was just meaningless static. I walked out of that sterile office feeling a deep, penetrating chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It wasn't just that he didn't believe me, it felt intensely, disturbingly like he didn't want to believe me. It was the first real crack in the foundation of my world, the first time I felt truly and utterly alone inside those walls. The message from the top had been delivered loud and clear. I was on my own. The pressure from Silas and his followers kept building, day by day, and I knew deep down this was only the beginning of something terrible. The weeks that followed were a living masterclass in psychological warfare, a slow, meticulous dismantling of a man. The game stopped being about the officer, about testing my professional limits, and started being about the man, about Jack Miller. The whispers changed. It wasn't just my last name being hissed in the dark anymore. Now, it was horrifyingly specific details. The name of the small town where I lived. The model and color of my car. Then one day, a day I will never forget, I was walking past a cell on the isolation tier, and a low, guttural voice murmured from the shadows, just loud enough for me to hear, "Hope Sarah's enjoying those roses." I stopped dead. My heart felt like it had ceased beating. My blood ran cold, a feeling of icy dread spreading through my entire body. Sarah is my wife's name. I had bought her a dozen yellow roses the night before for our anniversary. There was no way anyone inside could have known that. It was a small block, a dozen cells on that tier. The voice could have come from any one of them. I spun around, my hand instinctively going to my belt, my eyes scanning their faces through the small windows in their cell doors. I was met with a mixture of blank stares and cruel, knowing smirks. I could never know for sure who said it. And that, I realized, was the entire point. The message was brutally clear. The walls of Blackwood weren't holding them in. Their reach, their network, extended far beyond the concrete and razor wire and into my home. After that single, devastating moment, it became a relentless, daily assault. A death by 1,000 cuts. An inmate would accidentally spill a tray of food near me in the chaotic chow hall, and as 2 other officers were dragging him off, he'd lock eyes with me and silently mouth the name of my daughter's elementary school. During mail call, a time of heightened emotion and tension, I'd hear 2 of Silas's known associates talking, just loud enough for me to overhear, about my son's upcoming high school football schedule, debating his team's chances. Every personal detail they revealed was a new, carefully placed threat. Every piece of my private life, the life I fought to keep separate and sacred, was being turned into a razor blade and slid carefully under my skin. I started coming apart at the seams. At home, I became a ghost. I'd sit at the dinner table, physically present but mentally a million miles away, hearing the sounds of my family's laughter and conversation as if through a thick wall of glass. My mind was back at Blackwood, replaying every whisper, every smirk, every veiled threat, trying to connect the dots. I developed a nervous tic, constantly checking the locks on the doors and windows, sometimes getting up 2 or 3 times in the middle of the night to check them again. I'd sit in my car for 10 minutes after arriving home from a shift, just scanning the quiet suburban street for any car that looked out of place. Sarah saw it all, of course. She saw the weight I was carrying. "What's wrong, Jack?" she'd ask, her voice full of a concern that I couldn't bear. "You're not here. You're a million miles away." How could I possibly tell her the truth? How could I explain that the monsters I was paid to keep locked away from society were now invisible, silent guests at our dinner table, that they knew her name, that they knew where our children went to school? Telling her would only transfer the terror to her, and I wouldn't do that. So I lied. Stress at work. Overtime shifts. Budget cuts. The lies tasted like ash in my mouth and created a new wall, this one between me and the person I loved most. My co-workers were no help at all. They saw what was going on. They weren't blind or deaf. They heard the whispers too. But in the brutal, self-preservationist jungle of a prison, you learn one rule above all others. You don't get involved in someone else's war. They started keeping their distance from me. Conversations would stop dead the moment I walked into the break room. The seat next to me was always empty. They were afraid of Silas's reach, and afraid of the trouble that now seemed to stick to me like a bad smell. They weren't bad men, not most of them, but they had families and mortgages too. They chose to survive. Their collective silence was just another wall boxing me in, isolating me completely. I had never in my life felt so utterly and completely alone. The absolute breaking point, the moment the psychological game ended and the real-world threat became undeniable, was a photograph. It was slipped under my locker door while I was on shift. A grainy picture, printed on cheap, flimsy copy paper, of my 7-year-old daughter, Emily, on the swings at her school playground. She was laughing, her head thrown back, a picture of pure innocence. It was taken from a distance, through a chain-link fence. And it had been taken that very day. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely hold the paper. This wasn't a threat anymore. This was a promise. My mind was racing, a maelstrom of fear and rage. How was this even possible? None of Silas's immediate crew had been released. There had to be a leak. This information, this level of real-time surveillance, it couldn't be coming from an inmate. It had to be coming from staff. The thought was sickening, a profound violation of the most sacred code in our profession. The line between us and them is everything in that job. It's the foundation of our safety and our sanity. The idea that one of us, one of my colleagues, was feeding information to them, it was unthinkable, a betrayal of the highest order. I ran a mental list of everyone on staff. Who had access to personnel files? Who was new? Who was showing signs of financial distress or personal problems? Who was vulnerable? And then, like a wave of ice-cold, disgusting sewage washing over me, the realization hit. My brother-in-law, Dave. A year ago, Dave was in a bad way. He'd gone through a string of lost jobs, a failed business, and had secretly amassed a mountain of gambling debt he was hiding from my sister. He was desperate. I had pulled some major strings, called in favors I had earned over a decade, and vouched for him personally to get him a low-level administrative job in the records department at Blackwood. Simple data entry, filing, a position located in the administration building, far from the cell blocks and the general population. It was a steady paycheck, a chance to get back on his feet. I had been proud that I could help him, that I'd thrown him a lifeline. I left work in a complete daze, the photograph crumpled in my fist, and drove straight to his house, my mind a blank hum of white-hot fury. He opened the door, and I knew instantly. I didn't even have to ask. One look at his face, pale, clammy with sweat, his eyes darting everywhere but at me, told me everything I needed to know. I didn't say a single word. I just unclenched my fist and held up the crumpled picture of my daughter. He just collapsed. Not physically, but emotionally. He stumbled back as if I had struck him and sank into a nearby chair, burying his face in his hands. The whole pathetic, sordid story came pouring out between racking sobs. The debts were from online gambling, far worse than I had imagined. He owed the wrong people, dangerous people, a lot of money. One day, a trustee janitor, one of Silas's most trusted guys, who had cleaning duties in the admin building, approached him at work. He'd overheard Dave on the phone, begging a loan shark for more time. The trustee offered him a simple solution. An inside bank. Easy money, no questions asked, run by a powerful inmate who could help guys out of a jam. Dave, drowning in desperation, took the loan. But the interest was impossible, a classic loan sharking scheme designed to enslave, not to be repaid. Soon, he was in deeper than he had ever been. The friendly offers turned to cold, hard demands. They didn't want money anymore. They wanted information. Small stuff at first. Guard patrol schedules. Delivery manifests. Then they asked about me. They knew we were related. He was terrified of what they'd do to him, to my sister, his wife, if he refused. So he talked. He became Silas's personal source, feeding him the intimate details of my life. The roses for Sarah's anniversary. My son's football games. My daughter's school and her daily routine. "I'm so sorry, Jack," he wept, snot and tears running down his face. "I'm so sorry. They own me." And then, as if the betrayal wasn't already a knife twisted in my gut, he delivered the final blow, the one piece that made everything click into its horrible place. The warden. He knows about it all. He protects them. Some of the money from the loan sharking, it goes to him. Everybody on the inside knows it. Silas runs the bank, but Thompson lets it happen. That's why no one can touch him. That's why he's king. The floor dropped out from under me. The world tilted on its axis. The warden's curt dismissal. His complete, utter lack of curiosity. Silas's untouchable power and inexplicable privileges. This wasn't just an inmate's game of intimidation. It was a full-blown racketeering operation run from inside the prison, with the warden himself as the chairman of the board. My own brother-in-law was just another pawn, a tool used to torment me in Warden Thompson's corrupt kingdom. The weight of the betrayal was a physical thing, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I wasn't just up against a brilliant, sociopathic inmate anymore. I was up against the entire corrupt system I had dedicated my life to. I had one move left, and I had to make it so public, so loud, so undeniably explosive, that no one, not even a crooked warden, could bury it. The next morning, I walked through the main gates of Blackwood feeling a strange, almost unnatural calm. The fear was still there, a cold, hard knot deep in my stomach, but it was buried under a thick layer of pure, hard resolve. The psychological chess game was over. It was time to flip the whole damn board. I knew exactly what I had to do, where it had to happen, and when. The chow hall at lunch. It was the heart of the prison, the one place where the entire population was gathered, on public display. Every crew, every gang, every lone wolf, and 24 guards. And always, without fail, Warden Thompson himself, standing on a raised platform overseeing the meal like a feudal lord surveying his domain. It was the most public, most volatile, most dangerous stage I could possibly ask for. It was perfect. I went about my morning duties with a chilling, robotic precision, my movements crisp and automatic. The officers who had been avoiding me for weeks now watched me with a new kind of wary apprehension. They could sense the shift in the atmosphere around me. The hunted, paranoid animal they had been shunning was gone. In his place was something they didn't recognize, something much colder and far more dangerous. The noon bell rang, its harsh clang echoing through the concrete halls, and the low, familiar rumble of hundreds of men heading for the chow hall began. I didn't take my usual post along the wall. Instead, I walked to the exact center of the vast, cavernous hall and I waited. The room filled with noise, the deafening clatter of metal trays on metal tables, the scrape of benches on the concrete floor, 100 fragmented conversations roaring at once, creating a wall of sound. Then Silas walked in, flanked as always by his two biggest enforcers. He moved with an unearned swagger, and inmates literally cleared a path for him as he passed. Even some of the younger, greener guards instinctively looked away, unwilling to meet his gaze. He was a king in his grubby, state-issued kingdom. He got his tray from the line and headed for his usual table in the center of the room. That was my cue. I started walking toward him, my boots echoing on the floor. With every step I took, a strange thing happened. The noise in the room began to fade. One table near me stopped talking, their eyes following me. Then another. The silence spread like a virus, rippling outwards from my path. By the time I was 10 feet from Silas's table, the entire chow hall, 400 inmates and 24 guards, was watching in dead, absolute silence. You could have heard a pin drop. I stopped right at the edge of his table, standing over him. His two enforcers, mountains of muscle, immediately started to rise from the bench, but Silas, with a small, arrogant smirk on his face, casually waved them off with a flick of his hand. He leaned back, utterly confident, thinking he had finally broken me. He thought I was about to throw a punch, lose my cool, end my career, and hand him the ultimate victory on a silver platter. "Officer Miller," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "To what do I owe the pleasure? Have you come to join me for lunch?" I ignored him completely. My eyes locked onto his tray. Standard issue slop, except for one item. There was a large, perfect slice of apple pie on it. Pie was only served on Fridays as a weekly treat. It was Tuesday. Just another small, visible perk of being the king. I looked up from the pie and dead into his eyes. "The pie looks good, Silas," I said, my voice perfectly steady and clear, projecting across the silent, watchful hall. "A little extra something for running the bank so well?" The smirk on Silas's face vanished. It was just for a fraction of a second, but in that unnaturally quiet room, everyone saw it. His enforcers shifted on the bench, their entire posture changing from arrogant lounging to tense alertness. I hadn't shouted, I hadn't made a threat, but the accusation just hung there in the air, heavy and undeniable. I leaned in closer, dropping my voice so only his table could hear me clearly, but the intensity in my posture was for everyone in the room to see. "I'm not here about my daughter's playground, Silas. We're past that." His eyes went wide. Not with anger, but with genuine shock. The fact that I knew about his most secret weapon, the specific tactics he used to terrorize me, hit him like a physical punch. All the amusement, all the condescension, was gone in an instant, replaced by a cold, reptilian focus. He had made a grave miscalculation. This wasn't a broken man standing before him. I stood up straight again, my voice rising to fill the huge room once more, commanding the attention of every single person present. They were leaning in now, captivated. They were watching a guard publicly challenge a powerful shot caller, not with a baton or pepper spray, but with information. "I'm talking about the loan sharking," I announced, my voice booming in the silence. "The one you run from your cell. The one that preys on desperate staff members." As I said, staff members, I let my eyes flick for just a second toward the general direction of the administrative wing, a subtle but clear signal. "I'm talking about the interest rates you can't pay back," I continued, my gaze sweeping over the faces of the other inmates, many of whom I knew were caught in Silas's web. "The debts that turn into favors. The favors that turn into secrets. A low murmur rippled through the crowd of inmates. I was speaking their language. I was describing the hidden system of control and extortion that Silas had built, the one that so many of them had been trapped in, the one they were all too terrified to ever speak about. Then, for the final act, I slowly turned my body and faced the man on the raised platform overlooking the whole scene. Warden Robert Thompson. He was frozen solid, a tray in his hand from his own lunch, his face a mask of pure, slack-jawed disbelief. "Warden Thompson," I called out, my voice ringing with a new-found authority that surprised even me. Every single head in the room swiveled from me to him in perfect unison. I had him on stage right next to me, the spotlight shining on them both. Silas here seems to be running a financial institution right under our noses. A very profitable one, I hear. Don't you think it's time we audited the books? This was it. The moment of truth. All he had to do was act like the warden he pretended to be. Order the guards to drag me out. Shout for a lockdown. Put Silas in solitary confinement. Anything at all to regain control of the situation. It would have been his word against mine, and in his prison, his word was law. But he didn't move. He just stood there, his mouth hanging slightly open. The color drained from his face, leaving it a pasty, sickly gray. His eyes, normally so cold and in command, were wide with pure, unadulterated panic. He looked from me, to Silas, and back to me again. In that one fleeting glance between the two of them, an entire conspiracy was confirmed for the whole prison to see. The inmates, the guards, they all saw it. They saw the connection. They saw the shared guilt. They saw the fear. The warden of Blackwood Correctional Facility, the man of iron and discipline, opened his mouth as if to speak. A small, strangled noise, like a gasp for air, came out, but no words followed. He was paralyzed. The king had just been revealed as a puppet, and I had just shown the entire kingdom the strings. In that deafening, profound silence, Warden Thompson didn't just freeze. He melted. That single, charged moment felt like an eternity. The frozen warden, the stunned Silas, the silent, watching prisoners. The tableau was shattered by the deputy warden, Riggs, finally shouting, "Lock it down! Lock it down now!" The guards, jolted back to life as if from a trance, sprang into action. Alarms blared, their shrill cries echoing off the concrete. Steel doors began to slam shut all over the facility. The scene in the Chow Hall was erased by the controlled, practiced chaos of a full lockdown, but you can't unsee something like that. The image of Warden Thompson, powerless and exposed, was burned into the collective memory of the entire prison population. I was immediately surrounded, cuffed, and escorted to an isolated office, officially placed on administrative leave for my own protection. The bomb had already gone off. My real revenge wasn't that public confrontation, that was just lighting the fuse. My real revenge came later. That night, sitting at my kitchen table, I typed out a detailed, anonymous report. Everything I had was in it. My logbook entries detailing Silas's provocations, the constant psychological torment, the threats to my family, the photograph of my daughter. And most importantly, Dave's full, tearful confession, the loan sharking operation, the extortion of desperate staff, and Warden Thompson's direct involvement and financial benefit. I included names, dates, and specific details Dave had given me about how the money was laundered. I had become the one thing they never planned for, a whistleblower with absolutely nothing left to lose. I sent copies of the report to the State's Department of Corrections Internal Affairs Division and, for good measure, to the State Bureau of Investigation. What happened next wasn't loud or explosive, it was quiet, methodical, and efficient. A few days later, a team of plain-clothed investigators from the state capitol arrived unannounced at Blackwood. They took over a section of the admin wing and just started calling people in, one by one, for interviews. The warden was told to remain in his office, stripped of his authority. Silas was pulled from the general population and buried so deep in disciplinary segregation that he ceased to exist. These kinds of internal investigations are rarely fast, but this one had a fuse that was already lit and burning short. The investigators found Dave. Protected by them and ridden with guilt, he confessed everything, this time to people who could actually offer him protection. His testimony was the key that unlocked the entire conspiracy. Other staff members, seeing that the warden's absolute power was broken, began talking too, corroborating Dave's story and adding details of their own. The investigators quickly uncovered a massive shadow economy of extortion, gambling, and contraband that had been running for years, all protected from within by the man at the top. Weeks later, Warden Robert Thompson was quietly escorted from the prison by two of the state investigators. There was no big announcement, no ceremony. He was just gone. Months after that, a small article on page 6 of the state newspaper announced his indictment on multiple counts of racketeering and conspiracy. He was convicted and sentenced to spend time in a federal prison, a fate I'm sure he never imagined. My revenge wasn't a punch thrown in anger. It was a memo, a report that completely dismantled a powerful man's entire world with the simple, devastating power of the truth. The fallout was massive and messy. Silas was transferred to a supermax facility in another state, a place where his intelligence meant nothing and his protection was gone. Without his protector, he was just another inmate, and I doubt his life there is a pleasant one. My brother-in-law, Dave, resigned immediately. He faced serious legal consequences, but his full cooperation with the investigation earned him a degree of leniency. He's out now and getting professional help for his gambling addiction. Our family is fractured, perhaps irreparably. A betrayal like that leaves deep wounds that never quite heal, but at least the poisonous secret is out in the open. We're trying to rebuild, but it's a slow and painful process. I never went back to Blackwood. I was officially cleared of any wrongdoing, of course, but I couldn't walk those halls again. I couldn't wear a uniform that now represented a system I no longer believed in. The institution I had poured my soul into, the line I had defended for 15 years, was just as corrupt as the men it was meant to contain. I transferred to a minimum security facility to finish out my time and took an early retirement as soon as I was eligible. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I think about that day in the Chow Hall, about the look on Thompson's face, that hollow mask of disbelief turning into pure terror. I won. I exposed him and his corrupt kingdom. But at what cost? I lost a career that I had once loved, a career that had defined me. I almost lost my family. My story is an extreme example of what can happen when the lines blur, when good people look the other way, and when power goes completely unchecked. Justice isn't always clean or satisfying. Sometimes, getting it means sacrificing a piece of yourself along the way. I brought down the warden, but the battle changed me forever. It left scars on my soul that no one can see. And some nights, when the house is quiet and the world is asleep, I can still hear the whispers.